There are people who will never understand why the knock at the door feels like an earthquake, why the sound of casual footsteps in the hallway sends your heartbeat into quiet retreat. You're not antisocial, you're not broken. Something deeper is happening. You see, your aversion to visitors may not be about people at all, but about the sacredness of the space your soul has been quietly constructing within. This is not a flaw to fix, but a mystery to explore. Because buried in your discomfort lies a powerful truth. Your soul might be calling you back to yourself, and if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand how what you've always seen as a weakness may in fact be your most powerful gift. There are moments in life when the simple knock at the door feels intrusive, even threatening not to our safety, but to our sanctuary. The truth that so many carry quietly is this: they do not like having visitors. And rather than admit this openly, they apologize for it, conceal it, or assume it is a defect of character, a social deficiency to overcome. But what if this inner resistance isn't a disorder, but a signal? What if your dislike of unexpected company reveals something far more profound about your psychological orientation? Something sacred. When you find yourself dreading social intrusion, you may not be pushing people away out of fear or rejection. You may be guarding something unspoken. For some, the dislike of visitors is not rooted in bitterness but in reverence. It stems from an inner sensitivity, a psychological instinct that the outer world, loud, chaotic, filled with performative roles, can disrupt the delicate fabric of the inner world. And that inner world, though invisible to others, is where the real transformation happens. It's where the unconscious brews symbols, memories, dreams, and intuitions not yet fully formed. Those who prefer solitude are often not escaping people. They are responding to a deep and ancient impulse to protect the soul's quiet labor. There is an assumption in the world that social preference defines health, and solitude defines a problem. But to label introversion as a flaw is to misunderstand the sacred geography of the psyche. Not everyone is called to walk through life with noise, with guests always arriving, with parties always hosted. Some are called to sit in silence and decipher the hidden languages of the self. These individuals are not lonely, they are listening. Their dislike of visitors is a symptom, not of dysfunction, but of discernment. To prefer solitude does not mean one is incomplete. It often means one is complete enough to not require constant distraction. The modern world overvalues the external images, appearances, networks, popularity. It tells you that to retreat is to lose, to isolate is to wither. But the soul does not operate according to the metrics of modern society. It does not need validation from the crowd to be real. The soul requires something subtler, an atmosphere of inwardness, a space uncluttered by interruption, a setting where silence can speak. When visitors arrive, especially uninvited or without emotional alignment, they often bring with them an energy that the inner self finds dissonant. It's not the person themselves that disturbs you, it's the shift they demand in your psychological state. Suddenly, the quiet you are cultivating must be broken. The inner dialogue must pause. The meditation is disrupted. And while the world may view this as a small price for hospitality, for the soul in process, it feels like betrayal. This is not about becoming hostile or cold to others. It is about recognizing the sacredness of your psychological rhythm. Imagine, the mind has a vast inner temple. Some people keep their temple doors open at all hours, inviting every traveler to step in and explore. But others instinctively know that their temple requires careful guarding. Not everyone should be granted access to the altar. Not every knock deserves to be answered. And this instinct, to preserve the integrity of your sacred space, is not a weakness, it is a form of wisdom. What many fail to understand is that the soul does not heal in crowds. It heals in quiet. When you dislike having visitors, you may be in the midst of inner healing without even knowing it. The soul, especially when wounded, does not want to perform. It does not want to decorate itself for the comfort of others. It wants to rest in its natural state, without expectation or performance. Visitors often demand that we become a version of ourselves, a conversationalist, a pleasant persona, and that mask, though it may seem trivial, can be exhausting. For the one who is trying to unmask within, there is a phenomenon known as psychic fatigue, where the act of constant social engagement leaves the soul feeling fragmented. You say the right things, smile at the right moments, ask polite questions, and yet, after they leave, you feel strangely distant from yourself. That is because each time you suppress the soul's need for silence, in order to fulfill social obligation, a small piece of your inner integrity is set aside. And over time, the soul, in defense of itself, begins to whisper, enough. It tells you through discomfort, through irritation, through a subtle dread every time someone announces their intention to visit. This is not rudeness. This is the soul guarding its sanctuary. In psychology, we speak of the persona, the mask we wear to interact with the outer world. This persona is necessary. It allows us to function socially, to adapt to different settings, to maintain harmony. But the problem arises when the persona becomes the dominant self. And the true self, the deeper, intuitive being is left in the shadows. When visitors arrive, they often call forth the persona. You become the polite version of yourself, the charming version, the agreeable version. And in this moment, the real self recedes further into hiding. Over time, this pattern can create a subtle alienation within the psyche. You begin to feel like a guest in your own life. And so your soul, in quiet rebellion, starts craving out of misanthropy, but out of a desperate need to reconnect with what is real within. This explains why so many people feel exhausted after social encounters, even brief ones. It is not always the content of the interaction, it is the shift in internal posture. You must suppress your inner dialogue to accommodate external expectations. You must laugh when you don't feel like laughing. You must engage when all you want is to listen inwardly. And this continuous suppression breeds a kind of existential fatigue. The soul begins to ache, not because others are bad, but because you are betraying the subtle rhythms that guide your becoming. The truth is, many people dislike visitors not because they dislike humanity, but because they are in a delicate process of self-creation. And self-creation is not a loud process. It is a sculpting done in quiet. To become who you truly are requires stillness, introspection, time without explanation. Visitors, no matter how well-intentioned, often interrupt this sacred becoming. They bring their own energies, their own expectations, their own unconscious projections. And for the one seeking wholeness, this intrusion can feel like a spiritual detour. But society rarely teaches us to value this form of self-respect. Instead, it tells you that the good person is the available person, that the open door is a symbol of kindness, that to turn someone away is to be selfish or antisocial. Yet, the deeper truth is this. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks that open at the right time, for the right reasons, to the right people. The soul is not meant to be endlessly accessible. Like a sacred well, it must be protected from overuse, from pollution, from misuse. And so the dislike of visitors can, in fact, be a sign of inner health, a sign that you are finally listening to what your deeper self has been trying to tell you all along. The cost of ignoring this voice is great. People who chronically override their discomfort in order to please others often find themselves becoming strangers to their own inner life. They know everyone else's needs, yet cannot recognize their own. They open the door to every knock, yet cannot hear the knock of the soul within. They smile at guests, yet cry in silence. And over time, the psyche begins to fracture. Depression sets in not as an enemy, but as a messenger. Anxiety rises, not as a flaw, but as a protest. The soul begins to scream what the lips have been too afraid to say. I need space. I need quiet. I need to be left alone, not forever, but for long enough to remember who I am beneath the noise. So the next time you find yourself uneasy with the idea of someone entering your space, don't rush to label it as a problem. Instead, treat it as a message. Sit with it. Ask what it might be trying to protect. Often, the answer will not come in words, but in a feeling, a sensation of something sacred within that wants to stay intact. That is the voice of the soul. And it does not speak loudly. It speaks in discomfort, in resistance, in subtle fatigue. And when you begin to honor that voice, even when others don't understand, you begin the true journey of individuation, path toward psychological and spiritual wholeness. This journey is not for everyone. It requires courage to be misunderstood. It requires strength to say no when the world demands yes. But most of all, it requires faith, the kind of faith that believes your inner rhythm is valid. Your solitude is sacred, and your healing matters more than your performance. When you honor that, you begin to discover a strange paradox. The more you listen to the quiet within, the louder your life begins to speak with meaning. There is a kind of solitude that is not loneliness, but a form of sacred retreat. Many mistake silence for absence, but in truth, silence is often the fullness of presence. To crave time alone, to resist the casual knock on the door, or the well-meaning visitor, is not necessarily a rejection of life. It may be a deep alignment with it. There is wisdom in knowing when the outer world must be kept at bay, so that the inner world can breathe, reorder itself, And remember what truly matters. Solitude, when it is not the result of fear but of intentional retreat, becomes something transcendent. It becomes a spiritual discipline. For the individual seeking inner truth, time alone is not simply a preference, it is a necessity. This is because psychological growth, or what we might call the path to individuation, does not happen in crowds. It happens when the noise recedes and the soul begins to speak. The person who regularly feels uneasy about visitors may be someone whose unconscious is guiding them back to this discipline, inviting them to learn the art of sacred solitude. The space where the ego finally steps back and the self begins to emerge. Modern culture rarely values solitude. It celebrates visibility, interconnectedness, responsiveness. It praises the one who is always available, always plugged in, always entertaining. But in the spiritual life, the one who is always available to others is often unavailable to themselves. True solitude is not the absence of others, it's the presence of the inner life. And for the one who is quietly evolving, this inner life demands time and space. The dislike of visitors may therefore be the unconscious psyche's defense way of creating the boundary that allows growth to occur undisturbed. There are seasons in life when the soul enters what could be called a cocoon phase. It retreats from external stimulation, not because it hates the world, but because it is preparing for transformation. In such times, even a brief social encounter can feel invasive. The person in this state is often sensitive, not in a superficial emotional sense, but in a deep existential one. They are attuned to every energy, every word, every subtle shift in atmosphere. Their soul is porous, and in that porousness, they absorb everything. A visitor who walks into such a space, no matter how kind, can carry unconscious projections, unresolved chaos, or even innocent distractions that can pull the soul off its sacred path. And so the psyche resists. It withdraws. It says no, not as a condemnation of others, but as a preservation of the self. In ancient traditions, those who went through spiritual initiations were often sent away into caves, into deserts, into wilderness. They were separated from the world not as punishment, but as preparation. Today, we mock the one who sits alone. We worry about the one who says, "I don't want company right now." But that person may be undergoing a modern-day initiation. Their soul may be preparing for something vast, something the world cannot yet see. They are not lost, they are becoming. And to interrupt that process with constant visitation is to risk tearing the cocoon before the wings are formed. And yet, we live in homes now, not caves. We live in cities, not forests. We cannot easily escape into monasteries or retreat huts. So the soul finds its own language of protection. It creates inner aversions. It makes the knock at the door feel like a violation. It teaches you through feeling, this is not the time. This is not the place. Not now. If you listen, you begin to learn how to be in the world without allowing it to flood you. You learn to set thresholds, not just on your door, but in your mind, your heart, your energy. You no longer entertain every presence, just because it asks to enter. You begin to ask, is this aligned with my inner work? Is this visit nourishing or distracting? Is this encounter helping me remember myself, or causing me to forget? And then something deeper begins to reveal itself. You begin to notice that your home, your physical space, is not just a structure, it is an extension of your psyche. The outer order mirrors the inner architecture. The discomfort with others entering your home may be symbolic of something greater, the need to protect your psychological boundaries. Visitors do not just bring their physical bodies, they bring energy, histories, conversations, moods. They rearrange the emotional furniture of your space, even if just temporarily. And for the soul that is rebuilding itself, this can feel like spiritual vandalism. The home is where the psyche comes to rest. It is where you are most unmasked, most unperformed, most whole. So when the door opens to an outside presence, the entire psychic field is altered. It may not be the visitor's fault. They may be kind, gentle, well-intentioned, but their presence shifts something. Suddenly, you are no longer entirely yourself. You are, even subtly, adjusting. And the soul feels that adjustment as a displacement. It is not that you hate people. It is that you are fiercely loyal to the version of yourself that exists only in solitude. There is something incredibly empowering in realizing this. To know that your discomfort is not pathological, but symbolic. That your desire for alone is not selfish, but spiritual. The soul is not a public park. It is a private garden. And like all gardens, it requires tending, pruning, space to grow without trampling. You do not owe the world constant access to your sacred ground. There is wisdom in locking the gate, not to keep love out, but to allow the right kind of love in, the kind that does not disturb, but honors, the kind that does not demand, but listens. And if you find that few people understand this about you, take heart. You are not here to be universally understood. You are here to become whole. Wholeness is not the same as social harmony. There will be moments when you must walk alone, because your inner path leads away from the crowd. There will be times when solitude is the only condition under which your soul can unfold its message. The world may call this isolation. The world may even call it depression. But depression, at its deepest level, can sometimes be the soul pulling away from what no longer serves. It can be the psyche retreating into darkness, not to die, but to be reborn. You are not broken because you crave solitude. You are breaking through. You are awakening to a truth most avoid, that the noise of life often drowns out the voice that matters most. And once you begin to hear that voice, once you begin to feel the pulse of the self rising within, it becomes unbearable to be constantly interrupted. You find yourself unwilling to go back to small talk, to surface-level connection, to performative hosting. You want to live in authenticity. You want every encounter to be real, every moment to matter, and until such depth can be found in company, you prefer the honesty of your own silence. In this silence, you rediscover not just yourself, but something greater. You feel the presence of the divine in a way that crowds cannot offer. You realize that solitude is not emptiness, is fullness without distraction. The soul, when allowed to breathe on its own, reveals its connection to the eternal. In the absence of visitors, you are visited by vision. In the absence of chatter, you hear truth. In the stillness, you are no longer alone, you are accompanied by every forgotten part of yourself, and perhaps by the archetypes that guide all human transformation. So when others do not understand, when they ask why you are always alone, when they knock and you do not answer, do not rush to feel guilt. Feel gratitude. Gratitude that you are finally learning to listen to the sacred rhythm within. Not everyone will understand this path. That is not your burden. Your task is to remain faithful to what is real, to protect the inner flame, to build a life not on performance, but on truth. The soul will thank you in silence. And slowly, as it heals, as it integrates, as it awakens, you will find that even the quietest life can echo with the loudest meaning.